Dear parent, if you have a school-going son, if you have a school-going daughter, listen and listen again to what I'm just about to tell you. But before we do that, allow me to read you the words Stenson James wrote in 1988. This is what he wrote: that what is done or not done in childhood directly influences how well or poorly the child will receive the pressures of materialism, the temptation to abandon traditional religion, values, and conform to a different vision of life. The end of the words. Those words were said by James B. Stenson in his book. And that book is already there. You can see the cover page. Preparing for Peer Pressure, a guide for parents of young children. And let's assume that your daughter or your son schools together with the other 499 young people to make up a total of 500 children in that school. These are the statistics that Stenson talked about 1988, that 6 years later, and today in 2024, it could even be worse, as perhaps you might have noted through study observation or stuff like that. This is what he said, that out of those 500 happy praying children jumping up and down in break time in that school where your son or your daughter is part of, 300 of them, 60%, will have stopped practicing religion in the next 20 years. 100% will have been exposed to socially accepted pornography. I don't know whether there's something like that. 60 to 70% will have experienced premarital sexual relation. That is about 300 to 500 to 350 of them. 20 to 40% of them, and remember your son or your daughter is part of this, will have started to live cohabitually before marriage in the next 20 years. In that school, out of those 500 students or pupils, where your son or your daughter is part of, 100% of them, that is all of them, at one time or another, will have been actively solicited. Somebody will have tried to recruit them into trying drugs. 10 to 20% of them will have experienced some serious psychological problems. That's about 50 to 100. And lastly but not least, half of them in the next 20 years will have been married and divorced. They will be divorcees by the age of 30 in the next 20 years. Now, these are statistics that you are not saying whether your son or your daughter is part of them. But from where you are, there's something that you can do today, as we had heard from the words of Stenson when I started the podcast. Think about whether you are going to be interested in the career of your daughter or son, or the character of your son or your daughter. Preparing for Peer Pressure, a guide for parents of young children. Do have a nice time and go look for this book. I remain your messenger, Samuel Rago Senior, and thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast.